You're listening to Pop Finance, where pop culture and personal finance meet.
Who pays for it?
Nobody. You write it off.
Who writes it off?
I don't know. The write-off people.
It's a light look at the world of money through the lens of your favorite movies and TV shows.
You know, it occurs to me that the best way you hurt rich people is by turning them into poor people.
Blue Horseshoe loves Anaconda Steel.
From Wall Street wisdom to sitcom savings, learn a little about money while talking about movies.
How did you get the house back from the bank?
I bought the bank.
Pop Finance with your hosts, Preet Banerjee and Jason Bryden.
You're listening to Pop Finance, where we take clips from your favorite movies and TV shows that mention money, explain them in plain language, and then use that to level up your knowledge about finance without feeling like you're learning. I'm Preet Banerjee, a former stockbroker and wealth management consultant in London.
And I'm Jason Bryden, an actor and filmmaker currently in Vancouver. And in today's episode, we're going to break down a scene from The Justice League in which Bruce Wayne saves Martha Kent from being kicked out of her home by buying the bank that owns her mortgage. Does this make any sense, Preet? What normally happens if you can't pay your mortgage? I'll tell you what I did. In Zack Snyder's Justice League, Bruce Wayne is determined to ensure that Superman's ultimate sacrifice wasn't in vain. So the billionaire, whose alter ego is the Caped Crusader, recruits a team of metahumans to protect the world from an approaching threat of catastrophic proportions. Does this movie make any sense?
Well,
I don't go in on these tent poles. I've had enough of them. I'm not going to watch this one. It doesn't.
So you even haven't seen this one, but we're going to watch the scene and break it down. But yeah, I am interested in getting your take on the superhero movie genre. I think the general public is getting tired of it, but I think you were tired of it before it even began. So I'm curious to get your take as a someone who's done Hamlet, for example.
No. You have me confused with another actor. My superpower is just that I get more easily annoyed than anyone else.
Okay. All right. Well, let's cue up that scene.
Not enough what you did.
I did a mistake, that's all.
Oh, the music makes me want to puke.
How did you get the house back from the bank?
I bought the bank.
What an idiot.
The whole bank.
Slinger reflex.
All right. That's a short scene, but very to the point. And I think this is a scene that a lot of people had questions about in the when they walked out of the movie theater. I mean, there's a lot of questions people had about these movies. There's a lot going on, a lot of plot holes at times. But this one was something that I noticed over time became something that got talked about more and more on, Reddit forums and whatnot. And the question is, why did Bruce Wayne buy an entire bank to save one mortgage? And so the backstory,
because it's a way better line, isn't it?
Well,
I'm glad that it's a way better line than, I assumed your mom's mortgage.
Yes. It's
not as sexy as Ben Affleck going, I bought the bank. Then he does that thing afterwards. You know that thing? Does your dad do that? My dad does it. It's like an extra bit of punctuation after a line where you want people to feel that gravitas. It's terrible acting. But anyways, isn't that just, I'm glad everybody wants to talk about stuff for so long, because otherwise we wouldn't have a podcast. But I bought the bank.
Absolutely.
Better line. The end.
Yeah. So you know what? I think initially, I think that is a very plausible explanation. There's so much going on. This is a larger than life movie. I mean, we're meant to believe that people can fly, you can shoot them and nothing happens. A whole bunch of things that kind of requires you to park physics, amongst other things, way, way over to the side, right? But this thing actually had some legs, this scene. And a lot of people are saying, you know what? It's actually a brilliant scripting choice. And the rationale is, if you are Bruce Wayne, who has an alter ego, And some would argue that it's Batman who has an alter ego of Bruce Wayne and not the other way around. Bruce Wayne is kind of his mask. The real person
like
is
that.
Batman. But
That's interesting.
yeah, there is more to that, and we can talk about that. But if you are maintaining two identities and trying to keep them separate in the public eye, the billionaire buying or assuming the mortgage of Superman's mom, which again, secret, but if you just paid off some random woman's mortgage in, where is he, Kansas, that would actually raise more eyebrows than Bruce Wayne, a billionaire, buying a bank. Because that is actually more likely to follow the pattern of what a billionaire would do.
Right.
A billionaire would not just pick a random person and pay off their mortgage. It'd be nice if they did, but they don't do that.
But who would be checking up on this? Some hayseed bank in Kansas?
Well, listen, again, I don't know if you've seen The Dark Knight, but there's a scene where an employee inside Wayne Enterprises is checking the financials and puts together these weird expenses that kind of make it obvious that Bruce Wayne is fighting crime at night with all these gadgets and toys that Batman somehow has access to. So there are people looking.
And there is real world precedent. The way you take down a bad guy these days, and for years, starting with Al Capone, I think.
Yes, The Untouchables. I mean, that was a great movie. We should talk about that movie.
We should talk about that and tax evasion.
Yes. But yes, so the idea is that it actually makes a lot more sense for Bruce Wayne to buy an entire bank. And it's not just lazy script writing or something that is over the top or Bruce Wayne flexing. Now, that being said, the idea that Bruce Wayne is just flexing is also plausible because part of his undercover identity is not revealing that he's not all that bright. And so the Christian Bale version of Batman was told, listen, you got to start acting like a drunken billionaire. So he would buy hotels, his dates would go swimming in the pools and all this stuff because he had to learn how to be Bruce Wayne because, again, his real identity is Batman. And so to that point, the last thing I'll talk about before I turn it over to you to sort of, give your perspective as a theater guy on superhero movies is that there is a scene in, this is a Christian Bale Batman, Dark Knight Rises, where Selena Kyle, who is Catwoman, is at this masquerade ball and everyone is wearing a mask. And there's a scene where on the dance floor, everyone's wearing a mask, and then Bruce Wayne cuts in because he wants to talk to her, and he's not wearing a mask. And you'd think, oh, that kind of stands out. But when you realize, this is a Christopher Nolan movie, maybe a little bit more thought went into that than, the Justice League movies. But Bruce Wayne is his mask. That is his secret, his alter ego to protect his true identity, which is Batman, which I think is kind of cool.
That is interesting. It goes a long ways to like the psychology around how people deal with trauma and what you're able to put out there in the world. I don't know if you've noticed this as you've gotten older. I know I got a few years on you, but along with my superpower of being so easily annoyed by pretty much everyone, I also have really gotten in touch with my introvert. And I think that is like, that's Bruce Wayne or that's Batman, isn't it? He's an introvert. He requires street justice. He can't stand injustice. Mm-hmm. And so how does an introvert go about being a part of the solution? And then there's that whole American or filmic need of the silver bullet, the one guy who can save us, when it's never one guy. But anyways.
Yeah, it's never one guy, but I mean, this is the backbone of traditional superhero movies and, these comic books is that this singular savior, all versions of Jesus, basically, right?
Yeah. As far as this scene goes, I mean, it's pretty typical, isn't it? Like it appeals to the widest amount of dollars. It's recognizable, chiseled faces. Henry's face is fucking amazing. You know, when he first came on the scene, it was just terrible to watch. He's a much better actor now. And I don't want this to sound like sour grapes. I realize that no one's heard of me, and I'm an actor and I teach acting and I make stuff. But these guys won the genetic lottery of birth. Genetic lottery. They look so good, even with Ben Affleck's public emotional eating at Jack in the Boxes across Southern California. There's just something about people that look conventionally handsome saying trite, short one-liners that is very satisfying. It's also, it takes some skill. It's really hard to be still. If you've ever tried to speak in public or in front of a camera, it's really hard to just sit there and tell the world that your face saying these lines is enough. So these guys are total masters. But you gotta know that the two young actors within those middle-aged male bodies, the young guys that are still in there that got into this because of their love of movies and theater and their desire, their compulsion to perform, they're dying on the vine. You're seeing two inner childs dying in that scene because they have to say this shit. And they're doing it for a paycheck. They've got fucking mountains of expenses every month. And they're doing this because they got it.
I think it was an interview I was watching recently with Josh Brolin, who said that before No Country for Old Men, he was down to his last few bucks. And and he, I think, was thinking about getting out of acting and doing something that was going to make him money, because he was like, I've tried this for a long time now, it's not working. But then it was that moment that kind of changed things for him. And I think if I remember the story, he got his check and he misread it. He thought it was $50,000 for, I think, residuals or whatever it was, but it was actually $500,000.
Yeah.
And
so cool.
he just wasn't used to getting checks like that. And I think there have been a number of actors who have kind of said in interviews, there are some movies that they do just for the money.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the last 20 years. That's a good 20-year chunk of Nicolas Cage's career, isn't it? It goes to show, like, there's no point in comparing yourself to the rich and famous. There's no point in feeling envy, because it doesn't matter what you think people have. Suffering is suffering. Life is suffering. It's all shit, and then you die.
Well, not to go all doom and gloom, but now one of the things that we want to do in this podcast is we not only want to talk about our love for, the creative arts in the form of movies and sitcoms, which I think is where we're going to focus, but we're going to use that as a platform to talk about financial concepts so that people learn a little bit more about money without kind of feeling like they're sitting down and learning about money, which can be kind of boring for a lot of people. So we want it to be a little bit more fun. So we're going to take different scenes from movies, TV shows, and use that as a platform to talk about some of these concepts. And so the concept in this scene was this woman who was late on her mortgage payments, and the bank was going to repossess the home or foreclose. And then Bruce Wayne comes in to save the day. But this is an actual dilemma that a lot of people have faced in society. And I think a lot more people are going to be facing a situation close to this or just like this in the coming future, because we are coming through an extraordinary few years in terms of what's been happening financially around us, where interest rates have shot up. Inflation has been high for a period of time where everything is more expensive. Incomes may not have gone up as strongly, so people feel stretched to begin with. But whether you have a fixed rate mortgage or a variable rate mortgage, everyone is going to start feeling, if they haven't already, this massive jump in how much interest that they're paying on stuff that they already bought in the past. And so with more money going to just paying interest on debt, that's less money to spend on everything else, and people have to make some tough choices. And you've had an experience just like this. And I think it would be great if you could talk a little bit about what happened with you with respect to your mortgage and the interest rate environment, because you're not alone.
I had to sell my house in West Toronto in December 2023 due to a very variable mortgage situation because it seems like the Bank of Canada's only strategy for fighting inflation was downward pressure on the middle class, was raising interest rates at an irresponsible rate. And so, along with that was a labor lockout in my industry, where commercials is where I made most of my money. So there was a lockout by advertisers and brands and agencies that where they were no longer using union workers, and this lockout goes on to this day. It's entering its third year. So there's no opportunity to make money in an industry that I've been in for 25 years, which is a weird feeling when like you're at your best and you're not able to do the thing that you love. There was the pandemic. My marriage collapsed all at the same time. Then suddenly, it's weird how bad things turn good. Then suddenly I at least had this asset that I could sell and get myself out of hock, pay off all the debt, and become a renter for the first time in 20 years.
And how does that feel? How does that feel to go from being a homeowner? Because this is something so many people aspire to, like the Canadian culture and thinking about, you're not an adult until you're a homeowner.
Yeah.
That runs deep. How do you feel having been a homeowner and then being forced to become a renter?
Well, at first it felt bad anytime you have to sell under duress. It doesn't feel like you're savvy. It doesn't feel like you've learned anything about investments. But then it feels so good. It feels so good. It feels like you've woken up to go, why did I get married? Well, I did it because that's what we do. That was really what we do. You fall in love, you get married. There's no talk of, well, you could just fall in love and shack up and have babies together. You could have done that. You didn't have to get married, but we do these things. The other thing is to get a mortgage. That was one of the first, when I started making good money in 2001, the first thing I did was I got a condo. Now, that did allow me to have a house in a really nice neighborhood in Toronto all those years later. So it made sense, but and I made money, but it wasn't the only way. And there was no one there saying, or I didn't have the aptitude to realize this is just one way of making money. There are other ways. There are other ways to forced savings. There's other investments that'll make a return the same or greater than your house. And I had never learned until recently that the power of not having to service your investment, not having to pay a mortgage to somebody in order to make money on your investment. Mm-hmm. There are other ways where you don't have to pay anybody.
And what about the maintenance component, like the upkeep of maintaining a house? I'm hearing more and more from people who, they stretch themselves to save up a down payment and, to be able to afford a house in the environment we've had in the last 5 to 10 years. You weren't getting as much house as you thought you were going to get for the price that you're paying. And so they're stretched going in, and then they're like, oh, now the boiler's broken. Or, oh, it turns out that, I have a shared roof with a neighbor and they've got someone in to reshingle the roof. And they're asking, do we want to, maybe go in on this project together to save some money or whatever. How did you feel about me? Do you have a pride in taking care of a property, or did you find it as more of a hassle for you?
I'm not a handy person, so I wasn't good at that, and I had to learn a lot, which is satisfying. A learning curve is satisfying. Mm-hmm. But for the big stuff, for a crumbling Edwardian, it's a lot of money. It was also a semi-detached, so I was sharing a wall with a very interesting person, a very eccentric neighbor. So there are these hidden costs of like a neighbor that you're living with, so to speak, that you're sharing a roof with, that you're sharing a fence line with. There's hidden costs in the amount of maintenance, the time it takes to coordinate. There's hidden emotional costs. There's the keeping up with the Joneses, where your kitchen isn't as flashy as the rest of them. Then the bank or the lender, along with your mortgage, you just get a line of credit. And here you go. It just comes with it. Everybody's doing it. And money's cheap these days, and it'll remain cheap forever. And so you get yourself, you're making all this money and you get yourself this debt. And at first you're really good at paying it off. And you got this beautiful kitchen. I mean, our kitchen was in Chatelaine. It was so nice.
Wow.
And we had the picture perfect family. And then things change. And man, did they change quickly. I mean, it's slow and then it's really fast. And your feelings, like you can understand stuff intellectually way faster than the feelings department gets the memo.
That's a good quote.
That beautiful kitchen becomes a yoke around your neck and you're like, get me out of here. And now, Preet, it's a terrible kitchen, but it slowly doesn't matter. It's slowly not mattering as much. I mean, I love to cook, so it takes me a little longer than most, but I'm now in a different crumbling Edwardian, but it's not mine, and I don't have to pay for the roof.
It's interesting in that, I'm basically been a lifelong renter. I was in a relationship previously where the home was already owned by that person. And so I just kind of came in, but other than that period of time.
Did you help pay did you pay rent?
Yeah. But other than that period of time, I've been a lifelong renter. It's worked out so well for me. I feel like I can move around, take opportunity. Like I would not have moved to England as easily anyways if I had owned property in Toronto. When I was making the decision about, do I want to come to England to be with my wife? And so for me, it's worked out. I will say that there's one thing I learned the hard way about renting in England. Like if you're in Canada, you pay your rent, you may pay part of your utilities might be covered in the rent. You might have to pay your utilities extra, but the property tax is taken care of by the landlord, right? And they kind of factor that into the rent that they charge. But here, the renter pays property tax separately. So I get, you move in and the local council's office say, oh, hey, you just moved into the area. Here's your property tax bill for the year. How do you want to pay for that? So when you're looking at rents here in London, you kind of are comparing not apples to apples because you're kind of like, oh, yeah, that the rent should include whatever the landlord pays in property tax and they build that into the price. Nope. And so it gave me a skewed sense of what rents are here. And so they are already more expensive in the areas that we were looking in London compared to Toronto, if you can believe that. But then there's the additional cost of property tax, which I didn't factor in initially. So that was a bit of a shock.
And what are the property taxes like? Like my semi in Roncesvalles in Toronto, they were almost $7,000 a year. And the lot was this big.
Yeah. So it depends on which council sort of district that you're in. They can vary quite a bit. So initially we lived in Canary Wharf and our property taxes were in Canadian dollars would have been about $4,000 or $5,000 a year. And that was for basically a condo type place.
Right.
Where we're living now, it's a little bit less, maybe $3,500 a year Canadian, something like that. But again, that was something that I didn't factor in initially because I just didn't know. We can find a scene from a movie for a future episode about someone who is new to a country and learning about things for the first time, because even as someone who knows, I would say a fair bit about personal finance, I came to England, my credit score was so bad it didn't even give me a number. And it took me like 18 months to get it up to a level that was kind of like acceptable. And so it gave me a totally new appreciation for, being a newcomer to a country, even with a pretty good background in finance. But I'm
Wow.
going down a tangent here.
But before
So,
we move on, I just want to mention one book that changed my life, and that's Alex Avery's The Wealthy Renter. And I can
yeah,
highly recommend that. It's easy to read. It's Canadian. Its setting
yeah.
is Canadian, but it applies. And it just changed my mind about the stigma around renting versus owning, and how you can still be a responsible adult. You can still save money. You can still have a nest egg as a renter. And you're not just throwing your money away and paying someone else's mortgage, which is the line we've been fed. And I believe it is a line.
Well, especially when you consider that people who were in a variable rate mortgage, where their payment, the amount of their payment that was going to just paying interest, and normally a mortgage payment, your payment is split between paying down the principal and the rest of it going to paying the interest to service the debt. Well, as interest rates went up so fast, it got to a point where a lot of people, the proportion of their payment that was going to interest was 100%. And in some cases, it was actually a little bit more, and it actually caused their mortgage to get longer and longer because their payment stayed the same, but the amount of money that they're
Right.
owing each month in interest was more than what they were paying. And so effectively, they became renters again, which would be
Right.
heartbreaking. You probably scraped money together for years, tighten your belt for years to be able to save that down payment to get
Yeah.
into a house. Then a couple of years into your house, the amount of money that you're paying every month to a mortgage is all going to interest, and you're just essentially a renter again. I mean, there's a reason why this is an affordability and housing crisis that we're living through right now. It's a tough situation for a lot of
No,
people.
no, Preet, but we're richer than we think.
Yeah, I think they've retired that tagline, Scotiabank. I don't
Well, they
think they use
should
that one
have.
anymore.
Shouldn't have unleashed it in the first place. That was insulting.
Uh, let's let me give you my sort of takeaway on this episode in terms of the financial side of this scene, the concept that we're talking about, people getting into trouble with their ability to pay their mortgages and what ends up happening. My advice to people is, if you sense that you're getting close to the point where it feels like the walls are kind of closing in, the amount of interest that you're paying on your debts has gone up and up and up because of the rising interest rate environment, take steps to get a handle on what your situation is. Whether it is, maybe you work with a financial advisor, um, you know, ask to have a call to say, what does this mean for my situation? What are my options? What should we be doing? For those who are in a more dire situation, I've often found there's a number of financial professionals out there that fall under the space of, credit counseling, licensed insolvency trustees, people who help people who are really in trouble with debt. And my advice is, you want to look for a licensed insolvency trustee, as scary as that sounds, because they handle bankruptcies and, consumer proposals and all this stuff, and have that conversation earlier as opposed to later, because you may not have a Bruce Wayne who is just going to come in at the last minute and buy your bank so that you can stay in your house. And I think the
Yeah.
more time you have to deal with a tough situation is always going to be better, even though I know it's easy to just kind of like put your head in the sand and try and ignore things. But the sooner you can take action if you are getting into financial trouble, the better it's going to be.
I agree. And from somebody who's gone through it, it feels so good to not have a mortgage anymore. It feels so good to, even having a mortgage that you can afford, that feeling I had, versus renting. I much prefer renting because of retail banking, because of the mortgage specialists you have to deal with, because of the idiocy, because they're so quick to get you into debt. And then when you have to get out of it, it's so difficult. The flexibility, like you said, the way you move to London, far easier. My kids are nowhere near being fully whelped, but when that time comes, I'm not gonna have my heart tied up in some mortgage in a really expensive city. I'm gonna remain way more fluid because I got a life to live, Preet, and I would never have seen this if I still had that yoke of a mortgage around my neck.
Interesting. I think this is a sentiment that more and more people feel. Certainly, there's a degree of buyer's remorse for some people. And again, I think this is a function of the fact that we are in an affordability crisis. But let's talk about what we learned today. The first thing is the idea of Bruce Wayne buying the bank in order to save Martha Kent's mortgage may not be just lazy script writing. It may actually have been the smart and proper thing to do for that character, which he played off as a flex because Bruce Wayne is Batman's alter ego, not the other way around. So that was kind of my takeaway from this episode.
And my takeaway is that as popular as tentpoles were, I feel like a correction in that market is well overdue. And I'm so glad that movies like our next one, Nomadland, wins multiple Oscars because it's independent film. It's film about the human condition that I find far more satisfying than watching chiseled Mick, conventionally handsome pants, speak trite lines in a Zack Snyder film that barely makes any sense. But that's just me.
No, I love it. I think you're the perfect person to be hosting this podcast with. I look forward to exchanging views on movies and financial situations and helping people learn about money in a fun environment. I'm really looking forward to this show.
Great. People like talking about movies, Preet, more than money. We say, why not do both? Subscribe to our podcast or follow us on Instagram and TikTok to have fun while learning about money. And if you have a scene from a movie or TV show that you think would be good on this show, send it along. Leave us a comment. And if you have a comment to add to our discussion today, leave us a voice note and we'll put it on the air in the next episode. Speaking of which, we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, Chloe Zhao's Nomadland, starring Frances McDormand, who plays a woman that did lose her house and ended up living in a van because she didn't have a Bruce Wayne, much like us in real life. And that's coming up next on Pop Finance.